Okay, guys, today on this episode of Rotten Reviews, I'm going to be taking a look at one of our unfavorites, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 from 2007. We have a 63% on the tomato meter, the critic scores, and a 51% audience score. Now, I shouldn't have to tell too many people out there that this is perhaps the most maligned Spider-Man movie. It's certainly the most maligned Spider-Man movie in the Sam Raimi trilogy. For example, Spider-Man 2, this movie is considered, well, it's considered by everybody out there in the internet land as the greatest Spider-Man movie to date. It is a 93% on the tomato meter score and an 82% on the audience score. This I'm just using this for comparison for the pinnacle or the height that the Spider-Man franchise achieved. I would say it's Sam Raimi's, best Spider-Man, but according to Rotten Tomatoes and many other sites, this is all still, to this date, the best Spider-Man movie, including the version found in the MCU. So let's take a look at Rotten Reviews on Spider-Man 3 and find out just why people have such a problem with this movie. Now, I'm not saying that just a handful of fans have a problem. You can see people referencing this movie in regards to things well outside of Spider-Man on what not to do in a comic book movie. You see it today. You have factions amongst, comic book fans, and almost every faction agrees every faction agrees, no matter even if they're on politically opposite ends of the universe, they all agree that Spider-Man 3 is their least favorite. Some of them hate it just a little bit, and some of them just can't stop hating it. They're obsessed with it. So let's take a look, and I'm going to go through and probably read some 4- and 5-star reviews that also critique things that are wrong, flaws with this movie, but I'm going to try to pay most attention to the bad reviews, the low-star reviews, to find out just what makes people so angry. So let's start right off with a 4-star review. A very misunderstood movie. The pacing is a bit odd, and Venom was unfortunately forced on by the studio, but the depth of Spider-Man and his loved ones are still here. Okay, This review is also saying, it's concluding that the movie doesn't live up to its predecessor. It's still a beautiful, deep, and good movie, though. Well, right off the bat, there is something interesting here. I've seen this opinion put out, usually without too much evidence to back it up. I've seen the opinion put out that, it's not Sam Raimi's fault that Spider-Man 3 ended up the way it did, that somehow the studio or some powers that be in Sony forced Sam Raimi to do it this way, and that if it hadn't been for that, this would have been another Spider-Man 2, or certainly up to that caliber. I don't know if that's true. You're almost derailing into conspiracy theory a bit on that. It could be, but either way, the results are out. The final product is there, no matter who you blame. So let's just find out what it is about this product that is so hated. I'm going to skip down through some of the 5-star ones. A lot of people talk about Venom, about how that's a drawback. That's one reason. But let's continue down. 3 stars. I remember back in the day thinking that emo Spider-Man was the worst part of the movie. After rewatching recently, I've decided the unnecessary restructure of the Uncle Ben scene was in fact the worst part. Okay, another interesting comment. They mentioned not only emo Spider-Man, which means I guess the Tobey Maguire caricature where he's dancing and showing off in the bar, and then he walks out on the sidewalk and he passes by the women and acts all cool, and he's swaggering around and pointing back and forth to the hot girls, I guess, and they're calling this the emo Spider-Man. I guess it depends on what your definition of emo is, but I've seen this reference several times. To me, it's just like the cool cat, the over-the-top cool cat Spider-Man character that was the result in the movie of him being infected by Venom. That's brought up time and time again as a real cringe-worthy part of this movie. Now, personally, when I saw the movie, not being like a huge comic book fan of Spider-Man, I found it fine. In fact, I found it humorous. I didn't take it serious. I thought it was a little corny, but it was just something new and humorous to be put into Spider-Man, and I thought it wasn't a drawback at all. But then again, you just hear hate from people on and on and on, even into 2019, about how they just can't stand watching him strut around, and it's so cringeworthy to them. To me, it's not. It's just humorous. We have another thing brought up here, the restructure of the Uncle Ben scene. As we remember in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, the origin story, Uncle Ben being killed by a thug in a senseless fashion was in fact a motivating factor for Peter Parker as to how he became Spider-Man. It was a big turning point in his life in the story, and it was a big solid part of, at least in the Sam Raimi movies, of why he became who he was. Now, in Spider-Man 3, it kind of retcons that and makes the death of Uncle Ben the responsibility of a character called Sandman. Sandman isn't portrayed as killing him in an evil way, but just killing him as, Uncle Ben was just in the way of somebody who would later become a villain of Spider-Man. I don't know how close or far away that is from what was done in the comic book, not being a comics fan. But for me, just the average superhero movie viewer, it didn't stick out to me. It didn't rub me the wrong way. But it's an obvious retcon. I guess it just depends how true you want it to be to the comics as to how much this offends you. Me, it didn't offend me at all, but it was noticeable. A retcon, but not, like an unforgivable retcon, at least in my opinion. But this is brought up. I see this brought up all over the internet. 2 stars. This film was a bad place to end the trilogy, as this film lacks the enjoyment the first 2 movies had. Okay. 5 stars. Many will complain about this film, but it is not as bad as they say. So even, a lot of the reviewers leaving 5 stars, they are acknowledging that their opinion is not in the majority. They're making excuses. 3.5 stars. Please take it for what it is. It's not as good as the last 2 films, but don't write it off because of its memes and reputation. Honestly, it has difficulty keeping itself together. It could be 2 films. There's some things here to be appreciated. I only ask you to have an open mind. Again, they're kind of trying to apologize for the film. They do bring something up. They just barely touch on it, saying that it could be 2 films. Usually that's not what people say. Usually the critics say there are too many subplots going on at the same time. You have too many things going on at the same time, not only villain-wise, but in, the complications of Peter Parker's relationship with Mary Jane. Yeah, there is a lot for a movie that's, not overly long. There are a lot of things going on that kind of fight for your attention. The subplots are fighting for control to be the main plot. I kind of felt that way too, watching it for the first time. Back in the day, I thought, well, I'm not sure what the main villain is, because at the end they all kind of melded together. You couldn't tell if the villain, in some cases you couldn't tell because of the way they did Venom, whether the villain of the story was actually a psychological villain for Peter Parker, partly of his own making, or if it was a straight up external to Peter Parker villain. And there was a little confusion of that. So, most people say it had too many things going on, but here they touch on that as saying it could have been 2 films. I disagree that it could have been 2 films, because if you had just chopped this in half, it would have been even worse, and the results would have been worse. You would have had a lot of boring stuff in the first half, and then a whole bunch of jumbled up, rushed stuff in the second movie. It would have been worse. But I see what they were saying with that. We have half a star, lamest movie ever, Sony is the worst. Well, this is October 2019. I'm surprised they're saying Sony is the worst because at this time, Sony is kind of considered the hero of hardcore Spider-Man film fans, taking back, or the word is that they've recaptured, they've taken back the rights to Spider-Man from the MCU, and a lot of Spider-Man purists who consider the MCU version of Spider-Man to be weak and off-putting to them. They're glad that Sony is going to take it back and potentially merge it with their standalone, at this time, a standalone Venom. So we'll see, but it's surprising to see a comment, at this time that actually says Sony is the worst. I mean, I would have expected a comment like that, back around when this movie was made. Certainly not today, but it's there. 3 stars. This is bad, but I like it. It is better than the Mark Webb franchise. Venom is good. Eddie is a good character, but some good characters end up being downed. J.J. Jameson isn't as good here as in 1 and 2. He is good. This film is very funny. I love it. Oh yeah, Peter and Joker should be dancing on the staircase. Okay, that's a reference to the new Joker movie. I guess what they were saying with that review is that they appreciate it, and to them it's like a rebellious type of thing. Like, they're saying that Spider-Man 3, just I guess the existence of it to some fans is a slap in the face to purists. I guess that's what he's saying by bringing up Joker. Um, 5 stars, 4 stars. Okay, 4 stars. It's not the best one or getting the best reviews, but you got to finish strong with a three-peat. Worth a watch. Okay, 3 stars. This movie is far from perfect, but it has lots of heart. The reason this movie fails is because Sony interfered with Sam Raimi's vision. They tried to cram too much stuff in, and that made it feel messy and long. While it's far from perfect, it still has many beautiful moments, and you can tell that Raimi is trying. I'd still rank this above either if of the Amazing Spider-Man movies because it has heart. It is still an unfortunate disappointment given the incredible success of the 2 movies before it. Again, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is considered the pinnacle of Spider-Man films to this date. Now, this review is mentioning not only that he thinks Sony interfered with Sam Raimi, so he's like excusing Sam Raimi, the director, and he's also touching upon the newer Spider-Man films, the Amazing Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which of course, from my point of view, a non-comic book fan, are worse than the Tobey Maguire movies. And yet if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, because I just checked, those 2 movies, just preceding the MCU version of Spider-Man, actually have better ratings than Spider-Man 3 from Sam Raimi. So in the context of rotten reviews, I have to still stand by that Spider-Man 3 by Sam Raimi is the worst. Although I personally disagree. I really, really disliked Amazing Spider-Man 2. I felt that if you wanted to find a cringe-worthy performance, total cringe, would have been Jamie Foxx's performance as that ridiculous character he played in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but that's a subject for another time. 3 stars. I liked the film when I was a kid, and now I finally realized all the mistakes had made. I honestly prefer the original 2 and the PS4 game. Well, they touch upon something that many people have told me, that the PS4 game is the most superior Spider-Man. I mean, second only to Spider-Man 2. Some people say the PS4 game is better than Spider-Man 2. But if you are going to lump a video game in with a movie franchise, yeah, PS4 Spider-Man is the king of the hill, so to speak. 4 stars. Would have been a hit if they got someone better to play Venom, not Ty Scrawny Twig from that 70s show. What dirty favors did that guy have to do on the casting couch to get to play Venom? It's outrageous they greenlit this movie with him as Eddie Brock. That's why this movie failed and we never got Spider-Man 4. P.S. That 70s show sucks. 1 out of 10. They really don't like the actor that played, Venom at the end of this film. I don't know. I wasn't a fan of the 70s show, so he didn't, carry that baggage with me. I just saw him as kind of a vindictive, snarky villain. I don't know. To me, it didn't ruin it, just that. I thought, again, I would agree more with the fans that said there are just too many things going on for it to succeed. So let's move on. 5 stars, underrated with small problems, but much entertainment. So again, this person is giving it 5 stars, but saying it has small problems. Again, they need to apologize. So 3.5 stars. Granted, this movie isn't perfect, especially when compared to the films this followed up, but that doesn't take away the greatness behind it. While this movie is indeed flawed, and its inability to balance characters and its misuse and underperformance of Venom, I love it anyway. Again, that's another thing people bring up, that this portrayal of Venom was, in a kind way, just dog shit. And not being a comic fan, and of course, this was long before the actual standalone Venom movie from Sony came out. I had nothing to compare it to, so for me, it didn't bother me. But now looking back on what Venom was supposed to be in the comics and what he became later in the movie, I can see why they were really rubbed the wrong way. Venom in this movie is not really a not really a villain of his own. He's just like a black goo that kind of alters the host's personality and makes them evil. That's the impression I got from Spider-Man 3. So when Peter Parker was infected by Venom, he became like a cool hipster, want to impress everybody, narcissistic Spider-Man. But when his competitor in the newsroom got infected by Venom, he became a straight up hardcore psycho villain. It is like saying more like Venom is just, the worst side of yourself. That's the impression I got from it. Not that he was, an external alien threat necessarily. So anyway, 3.5 stars. It's better than what most people think it is. It's better than both of the Amazing Spider-Man films. Now, I'll agree with that. I didn't like either of the Amazing Spider-Man films. It wasn't even the actor that played Spider-Man. It was just the plot and the way things developed in the story. It felt almost like it expected the audience to be really dumb. I mean, all comic book movies expect the audience to forgive things, but the Amazing Spider-Man films seemed to actually be making fun of how dumb the audience was, if you will. And that rubbed me the wrong way, but let's not divert too far into those. 4 stars. It's an enjoyable movie. You feel the overabundance of villains, but if you don't think about it, it doesn't feel off. Again, another vote that it's overcomplicated, or too many subplots, too many ingredients thrown into the stew, so to speak. Another 4 star, the best of the trilogy in my opinion. It is a little goofy at times, but that is okay. Okay, somebody saying it's goofy, probably referring to emo Spider-Man, but not saying it's a deal killer. 5 stars. This may not be the best Spider-Man, but at least we see a real Spider-Man. Actually, this one's saying this may not be Spider-Man, but at last we see the real Spider. So that doesn't make any sense. They're almost saying this isn't actually the comic book Spider-Man, but it's still good. I think that's what they're trying to say. 3.5 stars. Although cringe at times, I think this is a good representation of what Peter Parker would think is cool, but overall a solid addition and conclusion to the trilogy. Again, it's the cringe at that emo Spider-Man stuff. 4 stars. The CGI is crazy good. The fight scenes are well drawn out and impressive. I love the Bruce Campbell cameo. It's crazy to think he worked with Sam Raimi on his first film. The humor is definitely there. The acting's so good. He's not bringing up any negative points. He's given it 4 stars, so I'll move on. 3 stars. I wouldn't even say it passed the time, as I rented it and then walked away checking in every now and then. Then it has the audacity to be over 2 hours long. You know how they have a director's cut? This one should have had a viewer's cut that was about 90 minutes. Then it might have received better reviews. The actors are all talented. It wasn't their performances. There was plenty of action, maybe too much. It just took too long to tell the story, or the story wasn't told in a way that was compelling enough. Again, I see this as a vote that had too many subplots, too many things going on. 5 stars. This movie is so comical and entertaining. Okay, this guy actually liked the Spider-Man emo dancing around, showing off, so okay. 2 stars. One of those perfect train wrecks of a movie. The scenes are like works of art in and of themselves and are a blast to watch. Don't waste an evening watching the entire thing, though. Again, I think that's another vote to see Tobey Maguire sing and dance and play emo Spider-Man, but skip the rest. 5 stars. It's so bad, it's good in the best way. The cringe moments are my favorite part, honestly. This movie rocks. So they're saying they got the cringe from emo Spider-Man, but they love it like that. Maybe they drink while they watch it. Okay, fair enough. Half a star. Horrible, pathetic, disgraceful. 2 stars. The plot is so overstuffed that it explodes. Overstuffed is another way of saying too many subplots. 2 stars. Sandman was a good villain because you really felt bad for what he was going through with his daughter. Good performances from the cast. They totally screwed up what happened in Spider-Man 1, where that robber killed Uncle Ben. Now they're saying Sandman killed him, which completely pissed me off. I couldn't believe they would tamper with the Uncle Ben death. It was fine in how it was. The Venom story arc and plot was so bad, you can definitely tell Sam didn't want to use Venom. So 2 things here. 1, they're saying that they didn't like the retcon of how Uncle Ben died. And 2, they didn't like Venom, and they believe that Venom was forced on Sam Raimi by Sony. Conspiracy stuff could be true, I don't know. 3.5 stars. Definitely not as good as the first 2, but it is still very memorable. Good superhero. Too many villains, but doesn't bother me. Decent acting. Okay, again, too many villains, too much stuff going on. 5 stars. The only thing I didn't like about it was the part when Peter Parker started dancing when he came out of the restaurant. Corny. Okay, another vote that it's cringe on the emo Spider-Man. 5 stars. This Spider-Man movie can't be the worst one. Well, the rest of the internet tends to disagree. I actually agree this isn't the worst one, like I said before, but I'm outnumbered by everybody out there of every political persuasion, it seems. 3 stars. I liked the first Spider-Man movie, and I thought the second one was okay. That's very unusual. Most people agree that the second one was the top, even better than the first one, but I'll continue. I was not expecting that much from the third film in the franchise, but I was disappointed. This movie was very, very cringy. It was kind of boring. Peter looked way too old. I liked all the stuff they did with Harry. I also liked Sandman. I, however, kind of hated what they did with Venom. It was not good at all. The stuff with MJ was okay, and overall the movie was just meh. It was not good and not super bad, but just meh. They're saying again, you know, it was cringy, the emo Spider-Man, it was boring, and a new critique here that Peter Parker or perhaps Tobey Maguire looked way too old, perhaps too old to play the character. I don't know if I agree because although we have an MCU Spider-Man where he's in high school and the Sam Raimi series started out with him in high school, there does seem to be a plot out there, a conspiracy to keep Spider-Man in high school. To me it seems like that. But in this case, the reviewer is saying Peter looked too old in the third one. But in this third movie by Sam Raimi, he was, out in the world working at a newspaper. So he wasn't he might be, you could say he was college age, but he was not a high schooler. So, that's iffy there on the age thing, but that's a good point. That's a new critique on it. 3.5 stars. A good and emotional but not great wrap up to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man franchise. Loose ends are tied up. A lot of setup with different characters as well as introductions to new characters. Editing problems show up as well. The middle smoothed out the rest of the plot to a very climatic and dramatic ending. Yeah, aged slightly better than expected after 12 years ago. Rewatchable. Okay, they're not, making too much of a critique of it. They're just saying they still liked it. 3 stars. When thinking about Venom in a Spider-Man movie, you think, great, this is going to be awesome. But now I can't think the same way after the disappointing Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi did an excellent job with the other 2 movies. So did the cast. But if Sony didn't force Sam to put Venom in Spider-Man 3, then we would have had like 3 other Spider-Man films starring Tobey Maguire. Again, we have a vote that, Sam Raimi was doing no wrong and Sony, the big bad Sony came in and messed it all up. Again, I don't know about that, but I find it hard to believe you'd have three other Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire, simply for the reason the other reviewer brought up that already Tobey Maguire was looking a little too old to play the character. So I highly disagree on that. 4.5 stars. The last in the trilogy, this film is slightly inferior to the others, although it introduces two great villains. The only part to really criticize is the one where Parker becomes bad after his costume is infected with the venom. Yeah, again, that's a valid critique because it's not just that Peter Parker was infected with venom, as I said before. It's more like his suit was just infected with venom, not Peter Parker himself. The way they did it in this movie is certainly a lot different than what Sony did with Venom later. They're actually saying that this symbiote, this alien symbiote Venom, is just like a suit. It's just living on your skin, influencing you, which again is completely different, a different mechanism from, the symbiotic organism that's portrayed in the standalone Sony Venom movie. So yeah, that's probably what off-puts people, that it is basically just a black Spider-Man suit that they're calling Venom. Yeah, half a star. Bryce Dallas Howard was miscast. That could be because I don't even remember her role in this. I don't remember what she was doing in this. So yeah, 4.5 stars. The best Spider-Man film by far. The first two are awesome as well, but the fight between good and evil makes an even bigger appearance here, thus making it the cream of the crop. Well, you're far outnumbered on that one. The internet would just crush you, like drop an anvil on you in a heartbeat to shut you down, because you're way outnumbered on that. 4 stars. It may lack the great qualities of the first two Spider-Man films, but Spider-Man 3 is no guilty pleasure. It still holds and is refined well enough to be a satisfying conclusion. Even though there wasn't really an absolute ending to this trilogy, a Spider-Man 4 from Sam Raimi would have been more than welcoming. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if, like, would people have complained that Tobey Maguire looked like a 35-year-old man when he was supposed to be 23? I think more of those complaints would have surfaced. Remember, we didn't have de-aging technology back then. What we had in the past for a de-aging technology is called makeup, and lots of it, and some lighting. So you can only do so much. 3.5 stars. Spider-Man 3 would have been better without Venom, but if you ignore the sad MJ stuff, then it's a great movie. Okay, another critique of Venom. 1 star, cheesy, especially the dancing sequence. Venom sucks, so does the new Goblin. Tobey Maguire is still horrible. The only redeeming quality is the scene where Spider-Man saves Gwen Stacy. So this person probably didn't care for Amazing Spider-Man 2 if he didn't like Tobey Maguire. So I can't totally count this one. 4.5 stars, great movie. 4.5 stars. Although it isn't better than previous ones for having many villains and many subplots, Spider-Man 3 is still a great film. Okay, so they're basically saying too many subplots, and Venom they didn't like. 5 stars. All right, so listen, I can explain the dance scene. He's being controlled by the symbiote. Yes, see, somebody apologizing for the emo Spider-Man dancing and, acting cool. Well, there's no need to explain it if it fit within everything, right? To me, again, yes, it fits. It's explainable by the symbiote, but I'm not the one trying to excuse it. This reviewer was, and yet he's given it 5 stars. 2 stars. Emo Tobey Maguire was bad. Kirsten Dunst's character Mary Jane is just horrible. Bad CGI, bad dialogue. I disagree on the bad dialogue and the bad CGI. Nothing stands out to me on the bad dialogue. Bad CGI, no, I don't think so. For its day, it was completely acceptable. If there's something to nitpick, it went over my head. I didn't notice it, and I've seen this movie 3 or 4 times over the years. 3 stars. This movie is just confusing. It has too many enemies for some reason, even if only one of them could have worked perfectly. Again, another vote for too many subplots, too many villains. Yeah, basically. 3.5 stars. It is not as bad as people say it is. It has some problems. Okay, thank you. 3 stars. Second worst Spider-Man movie. Well, if I did want to agree with that, I would have to say that the first worst would be The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but, he doesn't say. 4 stars. Honestly, nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. Spider-Man 3 gets made out to be the worst of the trilogy, which is not all wrong. The movie isn't as good as the previous 2 films, but it does have a lot of good moments, and the characters are more well realized than other reviews make them out to be, which makes it a pretty good movie. Okay, a lot of apology in that review. 3 stars. An overloaded storyline mixed with subplots and multiple villains makes Sam Raimi's trilogy's web-slinging fail and fall flat. Again, overloaded subplots, another vote for that. 4 stars. I do not think Spider-Man 3 is a bad movie. It just was not as good as the first 2 previous films. Really, Sony did not have to force Sam Raimi to introduce Venom. If Sam Raimi had been given total freedom, the movie, it would have been excellent, and we would have had an excellent trilogy like The Dark Knight. Again, more about Sony being the big bad. 3 stars. After rewatching this movie, I realize it's not as bad as I used to think. Story-wise and thematically, it finishes the story somewhat comfortably. Actors' performances were mediocre. The soundtrack was exquisite. Okay. So they're saying it's not bad, but they just thought the acting was mediocre. Okay, debatable. I don't see that. I just thought the acting was the same as the other Spider-Man movies. Maybe I'm just not that, maybe I'm easy to please. I don't know. But I think the multiple subplots, it made any shortcomings in the acting just stand out more. 5 stars. It's hard to live up to the Spider-Man name, and it's my decision that Spider-Man 3 is the best movie to ever have the pleasure of grazing the silver screen. Now, this movie goes into detail about the downfall of Peter Parker, showing that not all heroes can stay good for long. Okay, so they're saying they actually like this better than the others. Again, you are vastly outnumbered. 3.5 stars. Fun to watch, though not quite as novel as the previous 2 movies. The Sandman arc is one of the most well thought out ones so far. Yeah, I don't know about that. Again, I thought Sandman was kind of a weird villain. The part where he killed Uncle Ben wasn't the bad part for me. Actually, the part that made him not quite a villain to me is that he didn't actually just go and kill Uncle Ben out of spite for Uncle Ben or because he needed to hurt Peter Parker. He just killed him because Uncle Ben was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That made almost the Sandman character more sympathetic and less of a villain, and maybe that's why he didn't work for me. 2.5 stars. The weakest in the trilogy, too many villains crammed into one. Um, 5 stars, they're saying it was perfect, but it had some flaws. Okay. 3 stars, underappreciated and despised is this delivery that complements the 2 previous ones very well and darkly and poetically closes the trilogy. He's saying that some parts of it are occasionally misdirected. Okay. 2 stars, this is the ultimate case of doing too much. These aren't poorly crafted villains, and one of them would have worked, but they put too many in here, and it makes them all weaker. There's bad acting and poorly written characters all over the place. I do like that it's never really boring, and there are plenty good special effects. Because you know how you see these reviews all over the place? 2 different reviews can give it a 2-star rating and say it was overall just crap, and they both contradict each other on why. One is saying the CGI was no good and that it was certainly not boring. The other one is saying it's crap and the CGI is no good and it's boring. Again, I'm leaning towards it has to do with the overstuffed plot, too many subplots. In my opinion, you just don't know which particular subplot is supposed to take over and become the big bad, and none of them actually do, and to me that's why it failed. 4.5 stars. This movie was great. I loved it. Negative reviews can kiss my ass. Okay. 1 star. Worst Spider-Man movie ever. 5 stars, misunderstood movie. Watch again if you haven't seen it in a while and have an opened mind. Well, you should always go into a movie with somewhat of an open mind, but since this is the third movie in a franchise, you're expecting a Spider-Man movie like what you got the last two times, so you can't have a totally open mind. That's just not the way it works. 5 stars, great movie. This movie had a higher score before being review bombed in 2011 and 12 by the amazing fans. Okay, so here's a vote for like a conspiracy. Somehow fans of Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2 decided to review bomb this movie. For what purpose, I don't know, because a Spider-Man fan would be a Spider-Man fan. So why would you need to like go back and play favorites, and why would you waste your time doing that? It doesn't make sense. Now if you want to say Sony wanted to review bomb, or a rival film company had competition going on and wanted to review bomb, okay, that could be a conspiracy worth entertaining. But just that fans of a new version of Spider-Man wanted to review bomb the older one, that doesn't add up to me. 3.5 stars. Not a great film, but definitely not bad. It's the worst in the trilogy, but you can't have a bad time watching this. I'll largely agree with the bad time. I didn't have a bad time watching this. I'm not a comic book purist though, so it didn't rub me bad. 3.5 stars. I was intrigued by the characters in this conclusion, and I enjoyed the typical Spidey action. Okay. 4 stars. Funny. Venom is meh, but it was funny, full of action, not too much Peter Parker problems. Okay, a lot of people are like me. They're not hardcore comic enthusiasts, so they're not going to have too much negative to say. 5 stars, underrated film with great action scenes. 5 stars, totally underrated and misunderstood film, great score. Yes, it has its issues such as pacing and villain overload. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, too many subplots, too many villains. 1 star, the worst Spider-Man movie ever, but to be honest, I kind of love Tobey Maguire's emo walk scene. Now dig on this. Again, that scene isn't the big bad. I think, yeah, it's just got too much stuff going on. Let's see, 4 stars. I've heard that design for Venom is the downside, but that doesn't have to be the case because it still acts like a standard monstrous villain along with Sandman. That is true. It does. Venom does start out as just a black Spider-Man suit, but at the end of the movie, it does become a disgusting villain in its own right, or at least it transforms what was a normal person, maybe an unlikable person, into a total villain. So, yeah, 1.5 stars. Look, Spider-Man 3 is bad. Not awful, just bad. Mary Jane is more unbearable than ever in this installment. Venom has nothing cool to do, and character motivation, save for Sandman and Harry, is almost a joke. However, there are some good things in it too. Okay, so they're saying it's not all bad, but they didn't like Mary Jane. They said there was a problem with her. Again, that might be just trying to stuff too many things into the subplots. 5 stars, what an underrated sequel of Spider-Man. I absolutely loved it. 5 stars, misunderstood. 0.5 star, I haven't seen it, but Tobey Maguire is a terrible Spider-Man. Okay. 2.5 stars, Spider-Man 3 is widely regarded as the weakest Spider-Man film in the trilogy, and it's pretty hard to argue with that. Now, as an aside, by Rotten Tomatoes, it's actually the worst Spider-Man out of all Spider-Man movies, at least that are made for the big screen. Continuing, there may be more characters and plot lines, but Spider-Man 3 certainly doesn't have the emotional depth of the first two movies. Gwen Stacy and Venom were written into the film at the request of the producer, and it shows because Sam Raimi and Alvin Sargent don't know how to write these characters in a way that makes them interesting. Again, a vote that Sony forced Venom onto Sam Raimi. 4.5 stars, with an outstanding plot and dazzling, nothing negative there. 3 stars, not as bad as the Amazing Spider-Man duology. I'll agree there. Let's see, 5 stars, greatest movie of all time. No. 5 star, Spider-Man 3 pushes the boundaries of film for its time by introducing new concepts to superhero films that we've yet to see again. Um, I'm not sure how that, if you're saying it's Venom as the Spider-Man suit, we've seen that type of stuff before. You've seen Christopher Reeve become an evil Christopher Reeve in what, Superman 2? No, it's not original. So let's move on. 3.5 stars. People don't like it. Of course, it had some problems, and I won't say it was good, but it was enjoyable for me. I think it wasn't that bad. Not just the reason of great action sequences, it's because it had some memorable scenes. Okay, but they end with not Peter's stupid dancing. So really, they didn't like the emo Spider-Man. Otherwise, they're saying it would have been 5 stars or 4 stars. I don't agree with that. Um, I think flaws and all, again, this is just a 2.5 star. I don't know what I said at the beginning, but I could take it up to 3 stars, 2.5, three because it wasn't that memorable to me, but I would give this 2.5 stars. To me, that's like right in the middle of the road, and I'm not saying it rubbed me the wrong way. 5 stars, definitely my fave of all three. Well, you're outnumbered. 3.5 stars for how bad or confusing the story of the movie is with all the forced characters and setting up that Sony forces on its movies. Okay, so they're saying again, Sony forced Sam Raimi to do this, put Venom and all these characters at once, and it wasn't poor Sam Raimi's fault. Okay. 4 stars. Between this and the first one, better than the second. Oh, better than the second. Okay, this is a very rare opinion. Somebody saying that Spider-Man 3 is better than Spider-Man 2. Wow, you'll start some fights, some epic drag-out fights over this. And this movie's old. 3 stars. This movie is not Sam Raimi's fault. It's Ava Arud's fault for forcing Sam to put in too many villains. Again, people are convinced that Sony did this to Sam Raimi and he was the innocent party. It would have been perfection if Sam Raimi had just been left alone. I don't know if any director is left alone by Sony or any other big company. You see this again and again. Sometimes a movie is, 80% done, and a studio executive or multiple studio executives come in and force it all to get changed up to have reshoots, etc. Just saying that everything's perfect, it was just this time when Sony interfered. You can bet that if Sony interfered, what you're calling interfered, if that happened during the filming of Spider-Man 3, then that same thing probably happened during the filming of Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, because it's the same Sony. So maybe, something else is to blame here. That's why I kind of say that this is going into the realm of conspiracy theory, because how come this studio interference didn't hurt the first two movies, right? 5 stars. This movie is very underrated. Yeah, maybe a little underrated. It doesn't deserve hate, but they're saying it should be at least 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. I can't agree on its own, but if you want to make a comparison to the Amazing Spider-Man movies and they're getting those huge numbers, then yeah, this one should get those too. 1.5 stars. Oh no, what a mess of a film. I don't know whose fault it was to make this movie like this, but I am shocked no one seemed to stop them. No one stopped them because this is the way they wanted it. I don't know what to tell you. 4 stars. While I still enjoyed this movie, I felt like Venom didn't get the representation he deserves. Okay, so let's say that Venom had gotten the representation that you think he deserves. He had more backstory. He was fleshed out. He was a symbiote, a complete symbiote, not just a suit. Then how long do you think this movie should have been? Do you think it should have been like 3 hours and 45 minutes? Are we talking like an Avengers Endgame length here? I don't think that would have worked. 3.5 stars, Spanish. 4.5 stars, criminally underrated, extremely satisfying. Venom is the only bad character, and honestly, the only reason this doesn't get 5 stars. Also, the black suit theme is the greatest piece of film score ever composed. I doubt this because I don't remember it at all. If it were that great, even just being a casual superhero fan, I would have remembered the music, and I don't. Um, 3 stars. If the script was better or if there were 2 less villains, Spider-Man 3 could have been a great ending to Raimi's trilogy. Instead, it decides to overstuff itself and favor cringe-inducing moments over thrilling action or meaningful character development. 3.5 stars. Though it may very well be the weakest of the series, it still did enough things right to be an enjoyable film. 3 stars. Liked the action, but Peter, what were you thinking? 1 star, horrible third film. The script is a mess. The CGI is bad and overused, and the villains are dumb. No, the CGI was fine. 4 stars. I don't get why people don't like this movie. Yeah, initially I didn't get that either. That's why I'm doing this, and I'm concluding basically that largely it's too many villains in the plot, too much subplot material. You don't know who's the big bad. And in a comic book movie, you kind of need a big bad. Certainly, the other 2 Spider-Mans had one, and Spider-Man 2 had Doc Ock. He was the big bad right from the beginning. It didn't have anybody else in there vying for the big bad slot. So, yeah, people just were expecting to see one of these villains picked, and that was going to be the villain. And they got kind of like a hodgepodge of villains. 5 stars. Just watched this on the weekend with my 2 boys. One word, amazing. I wouldn't say it's any more amazing than the first two. En contraire, right? 2.5 stars. Scatterbrained mess. All I have to say. 2.5 stars. Sony steps on Sam Raimi's toes. 2 stars. Overstuffed with characters. Wasted potential with the symbiote storyline and with an iconic Spider-Man and Venom. Dramatic moments that didn't work as well as they should. And of course, unintentionally hilarious at times, makes Spider-Man sadly worth a skip. But the action is great. I'll agree with this. If they had just picked Venom as the big bad villain, and they had just done that all the way through, keep the running time 2 hours, yeah, this wouldn't. It would easily have, gotten those big 80% plus audience scored numbers on Rotten Tomatoes, but that didn't happen. 5 stars. Anyone who is a hardcore fan of the '90s cartoon will see frame by frame scenes coming to life. That doesn't mean anything. This isn't the cartoon. This is a movie. We judge it on its own. We do compare to other movies, but I'm not going to compare this to a cartoon and like somehow bring it up or down because of a cartoon. No, 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 that's way off base. 5 stars. The Spider-Man trilogy comes to an action-packed and beautiful end. Okay. 5 stars. Though it can be stupid and confusing at times and not as good as the second one, I think this film still does better than the first one and is still pretty enjoyable. It's kind of weird how they're giving it 5 stars, but they are saying that it can be stupid and confusing at times. You have to pick a side here, right? 2.5 stars. Emo Parker sucks. They tried to cram in too much at once, and Venom is much better in 2018. Other than that, the movie is okay. 5 stars. Though bad in some parts, okay, then why is it 5 stars? 1 star. Just when I thought Sam Raimi got his crap together, I honestly thought they were going to revive this series, but thank God it's over. At least they're blaming Sam Raimi and not, some nebulous big bad studio. 3 stars. It is okay, not terrible. 1.5 stars. A convoluted web devoid of any tension, as the film's attention constantly swings from one subpar plot thread to the next, leaping from this toothless villain to the next. Worse, though, than being so scattered and superficial as to be utterly forgettable is that the only narrative strand that truly lands with any memorable impact is the jaw-droppingly awful sequence of Peter Parker, but at least your jaw is dropping in laughter. I largely agree with this. Yeah, that is the most memorable thing. To me, it's not off-putting, but it is the most memorable. His song and dance number, his cool cat swagger out on the street. To me, that is the most memorable part, not anything else. So yeah, I largely agree with this. 5 stars. Really good movie. I freaking enjoyed it more than one and two. Well, I don't know what you were smoking, but let's not go that far. 2 stars, emo Peter, enough said. 3.5 stars. I liked most of it except Venom since the costume is crappy. Again, it's just a black Spider-Man suit until the very end. 3.5 stars. I liked it. I get it that you didn't like the dance part. I'm pretty sure Toby didn't want to do it, but the rest of the movie is pretty decent. I'll disagree on that. It seemed to me that Tobey Maguire was having a hell of a good time, not only dancing and showing off in the restaurant bar, but swaggering around on the street. It didn't come across to me like he wasn't into it at all. I don't get that even in the slightest. I think he actually enjoyed filming that. He didn't think it would have a backlash, I'm sure. 5 stars. Don't know why this got such bad reviews, and it's just so sad for this to get bad reviews. And I understand that using two villains is always a bad idea, but I would have just loved to see Sandman instead of Venom, and Sandman, but nonetheless, great film. I kind of disagree. I would have rather saw Venom. I thought that was a better concept as a non-comic book fan of Spider-Man. Just somebody that knows Spider-Man from the popular movies. I think Venom would have worked a lot better. The concept was just so cool. 5 stars. The movie is unique in its own way. 4.5 stars. I have only seen this movie once, and it's already my favorite of the Raimi trilogy. It was cool how Peter Parker turned into a version of Harry Osborn. The movie could have gone a bit better without Venom, but that wasn't Raimi. Raimi was forced to add him in. Look it up. The emo strut didn't ruin the movie either because the other two had their own shares of cringy moments. Overall, though, such a great movie. I'm going to end it on that because that makes a good final word. Again, I don't know what they're saying to look up, but it's not, the director is an employee of a film company, unless in some circumstances it's like a James Cameron where he's his own boss. But in the case of Sam Raimi and Sony, Sam Raimi, he's not the king of the movie. He is an employee of Sony. They can tell him what to do, or he can quit or be fired. So you can't just say it's big bad Sony. He had no problem adjusting to Sony's wishes in the first two movies and making the fans happy. He didn't do it in this one. So I say no, let's not read up on a conspiracy and that may or may not be substantiated or corroborated by Sam Raimi himself. Let's just take it as he couldn't do what the fans wanted and what Sony wanted. But don't just say it's big bad Sony, because Sony produced Venom and everybody loves Venom in 2019. In fact, they like it better than they like, in general, Spider-Man in the MCU. So, no, don't go there. I'm going to leave this one as concluded that, to me, Spider-Man 3 does get more hate than it deserves. I'm not going to change anybody's mind, I'm sure, but I think their minds might change, if another Spider-Man comes out, and because of this dispute between the MCU, Disney, and Sony, we get a really disaster movie of a Spider-Man. I think you'll see reviews come back to this one, and maybe that audience bucket, that green spilt audience bucket, will go back up again, back upright, because certainly The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 are not good. Not good by a long shot, in my opinion. So I will see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.